You're listening to Music Tectonics.
The Colossal Future.
Hey everybody, welcome to Music Tectonics, the podcast that goes beneath the surface of music and tech. I'm your hostess for this episode, Tristra Jaeger, Chief Strategy Officer at Rock Paper Scissors, the PR firm that specializes in music innovation and technology. Today, I'm talking with music industry thinker Rob Abelow, whose insights and hot takes at Where's Music Going tell it like it is when it comes to the business and the art of music. He's been thinking and writing a lot about the future of the industry and its business models, considering how music streaming and artist businesses are changing right now. And now we're going to dive with Rob into some thoughts about what the future holds for artists, for services like Spotify, and for labels and all sorts of other cool stuff. So, Rob, thanks so much for joining us.
Thanks so much for having me here.
So I want to kick things off by jumping into a piece that you wrote not long ago about music's next decade. You declare that this next decade is about cultivating fans. Hurrah. I mean, everybody loves fans. I'm a fan of fans. Can you help us get deeper into what exactly that means? What exactly does it mean to cultivate fans?
Yeah, it's so interesting, too, because I wrote that piece a little over a year ago, like March of last year, and how much the conversation has changed since that time in the music industry, where you can't have a conversation where you're not talking about fans or super fandom. And I think the concept there is the last decade or so, which I tend to call like the streaming decade, has really been focused on this passive, casual, lean back experience, at least on the recorded music side.
Totally.
One offering for everybody, one price. And there was a lot of benefit for the industry. There was just so much growth and scale to be had that there was not really a reason to like think about segmentation or fandom. There was just so much advantage there. And I think a lot of incentives kind of came out in how you create or how you try to sign or build things. I think as we're seeing, that growth slow and the reliability of certain marketing levers we can pull for artists and the algorithm becoming more of the gatekeeper, on all sides, it just makes so much more sense to kind of a return to fandom and how important that's always been, and to think about how we cultivate that. So for streaming platforms, that's different pricing and offers and segmentation. For labels, it's figuring out how they actually get their hands on that. And for artists, it's like, how do you create real sticky relationships and sustainable businesses? And when I think about like how we cultivate it, it's, how can we create meaningful relationships between artists and fans? How can we like elevate the experience for music's biggest fans that look something different than just kind of like the same experience for everybody? And a lot of this is like, how can we focus on artists and not just songs or like my air quotes here, content?
Yeah. the evil word.
Yes.
I love that we're getting into a post-content era.
Yeah, we all hate it.
But I love what you're saying about relationships, and it's interesting too, because if you think about you mentioned sort of past thinking about fan relationships, and if you think about 30 years ago, the way people related to fans or celebrities or whatever we want to call public figures that captured people's imaginations versus the way people relate to them now, there's some similarities, but there's also some really interesting differences, right? Like things have changed. And I think we've got a whole lot to learn about how people really connect now that we have this whole digital infrastructure that people are, interacting with. So one way you're thinking about one thing you've proposed in some of your writing about how to measure fan commitment and fan passion is intensity versus the vanity metrics of things like social media. And I think a lot of artists think about this a lot, because it's like, do I try to get more folks follow me on Instagram, or do I try to find something else? Mm-hmm. Do I find people some other way? Because, we've discovered that the likes and follows don't translate well into action in real life, right? Like I think you've brought up in some of your pieces, people can have big social media following, and yet they can't sell a ticket to a show. So if we're looking at intensity, how do we define that intensity? And what are some good indicators? Like, what should we be looking at if we're looking for intensity from fans?
Great question. Yeah, that last point. I mean, I think we're seeing it now with, these big artists who, are canceling their tours. And it's like monthly listeners aren't your fans, something I say, right? And it's like, these metrics obviously matter. They're important. They're indicators for things, and they could be your top of funnel. But they're not your end goal. And I think that is the most important thing, because we tend to build or create for what we're measuring. And it's so easy for us to always look at those vanity metrics, monthly listeners, streams, followers, and likes, because they're just in our face everywhere we go. They're really easy to compare. For the industry, it's easy for us to like build them into products and APIs and analytics and algorithms that are trying to find things. But if you're really looking at like your business, you have to think about what are the things that are like the biggest indicators for, am I creating strong relationships and like going to create something that's sustainable for me? And it's tough because that can be different for each artist. It's somewhat bespoke. But the framework I tend to use is that low intent and high intent actions, low intent and high intent fans. So I mean, most of the ways that people interact with music right now are low intent. So it's in the background, maybe chosen for them on a playlist. They may not even actually know who the artist is or what the song is. And those things are great. They have their purpose, but you really want to focus on the higher end, the middle and higher end of the spectrum of intent. So that's buying, joining, interacting, participation. So that could be, a lean in listen. It could be joining your newsletter, joining your community, participating in that community, social listening, obviously buying things like your record or going to tour, and then kind of upgrading from there into membership or VIP. I do like to focus that not all of those things have to be monetary. People who are like, especially now as we're seeing with artists like Fred Again and Kenny Beats, who've created like this incredible participation with their fans and community. It's like that level of intensity is such a large indicator of like those artists they're gonna blow up, and they're gonna be here in 10, 20 years more than anything. And I think for artists, it's really figuring out what are the most important things for you. Like, how do you reliably measure them and like look at them every single day, right? So it's like, this is actually how I measure success. And something like monthly listeners or likes or streams are really just pathways for me to get to that point.
You're almost proposing what I would call, from my snooty academic standpoint, an ethnographic approach, right? And ethnography is where you go to a community and you listen, you watch, you observe, and you're looking for qualitative as well as quantitative measures. And in some ways, we've really been blinded by all this great quantitative data we've had, right? And maybe the next decade, we're trying to find more qualitative ways to identify fans or find activities that are meaningful to people who love music or love the kind of music that we are creating or putting out into the world. And then finding ways to act on those insights, right? So
Exactly.
So what are you thinking about? How do you think in the next 10 years or so people are going to be trying to boost this intensity for fans? I mean, there's a lot of very, dare I say, extractive talk about super fans. Like, how can we get more money from fans is what a lot of people are asking. But how can we get more joy from fans? How can we get more excitement from fans? Those are also really, really relevant for both long-term business and just like the health of an artist and the health of a music community. What do you think? How do you imagine in the future, in the near future, we're going to be boosting this intensity?
Yeah. The extracting thing is really interesting because fandom and super fandom is actually pretty well monetized in the music industry. It's just mostly outside of recorded, which is why, like, as streaming and recorded music is looking like, the growth is slowing, that's where all the talk comes from. But like live in places like that is where so much of fandom is monetized and it's crushing, so and a lot of the things we're seeing in new offerings or things that are suggested are actually happening are very much extractive and really missing the point of, if you can better serve and give value and reward and incentivize that type of behavior, it's going to give you so much more sustainability to your career. And also now, because like I mentioned before, it's so hard for artists and teams to kind of break through the noise. There's just no reliable way to do anything except if you have a strong relationship with your fans and like an actual connection to them, that you're unreliant on others. So like there's so much more value in it there than anywhere else. I mean, I think it's there's kind of multiple levels. We need new infrastructure, tools, and behaviors that like incentivize that type of thing, right? So it's like, I think a lot of streaming has built this incredible experience for finding the right song at the right time for the right person in this hyper personalized space. And that's awesome, but it actually solves like one part of what music is. There's a whole nother part of what music is that's connective. It's connective to me and the artist. It's connected to the other people listening to it. It's nostalgic. And I think we're going to hopefully see maybe things layered on top of streaming. We have a company called Rhythm that had been shut down at a Discord a few years ago that was social listening, that just relaunched yesterday. Stationhead, which is a company I advise on that you work with, that is incredible for listening parties and social listening. I think more places like that are places for lean in, but aren't totally like just artist silos, are really, really important. And I think there's going to be more of those. I also think with like AI and creativity, there's going to be more places where there's like a feedback or a back and forth between creator and consumer that's going to be helpful. But then on the artist side, I think you mentioned how different it is from decades ago to now. It's like, and I mentioned Fred again and Kenny Beats as examples.
No, it's okay.
It's like
we could talk about Fred again. Yeah.
Creating spaces have high intent and actions with people, right? And how can you find the people who are creating the most value in your community, participating with like your music, et cetera, and how can you reward them and then show everybody else like, I'm a member of my own community, and it's valuable to spend your time and energy here. It's finding ways to make that happen.
I mean, I think Fred again could be just, what he has done is such a great example of signaling community, in that every single album image or track image has people on it, people having fun together, right? He does tons of features, remixes. He is like always collaborating. And in that regard, he's basically signaling like, I want this to be about a community. That's his whole aesthetic. And that is what is so, in some ways, that's a great, he's maybe a symbol or a bellwether, right, of what's to come, because you make such a great point. This hyper customization is in fact antisocial, and it hinders the creation of community. So, a lot of these new AI projects that are coming out where it's like you can write your own novel or you can create your own song. These are all super, super personal. And if you haven't read a lot of novels or if you haven't listened to a ton of music, you don't even kind of know where your boundaries are and where your true joy lies, right? So you're only going to make something for yourself. How do you share that with other people? How do you share that experience with other people? It's in fact kind of, anyone who's talking about this kind of hyper personalization is kind of talking about further isolation, which is maybe not what we want, and which isn't really what music communities long to build together. That's such a wonderful point. And how, I'm wondering, are we going to see a lot more artists who are finding different ways to kind of, like Fred again has done, to signal, let's build a community together.
Exactly. I mean, I say like the number one skill for an artist in the next decade is being a community builder. And it's a great, you mentioned his artwork. I mean, even in the music, it's like these are from voice notes and it's with friends. It's just, it signals all of that to everybody. And I think not every artist is going to be, that specific subset, but it's finding ways when there is so much out there. And now even with AI, there's, even more, and you can kind of create your own. It's to get behind something, you need to feel like you're almost on like a mission together with the artist and the other people around it. I mean, for it to stand out and take up your time and want you to commit and be a fan, it has to kind of be something more. And there's almost like a bifurcation of we're going to see like, there's more personalization and like AI and like inauthenticity in some regards. And then there's this whole other, group of artists and what people care about that is like diving further and further into authenticity and community. And I think both those things can kind of live together at the same time.
Yeah, in fact, the art thrives where there's these strong like these strong counterpoints, and it'll be interesting if you've got the tension between these two, diametrically opposed poles. There could be some really cool stuff that comes out of that. All right. I don't want to go too far down any kind of crazy philosophical rabbit hole right this second. We're going to take a quick break, and we'll be right back with Rob.
We interrupt this podcast to bring you breaking news. Applications are now open for Music Tectonic's Swimming with Narwhals startup pitch competition. Get your application in by August 12th, 2024 at musictectonics.com. That's also where you'll find eligibility requirements, a timeline for the competition, and an FAQ. When you apply to Swimming with Narwhals, you'll get a warm welcome into the Music Tectonics community of music innovators, and your project gets seen by our juries of investors and experts. You could be one of 4 finalists in the spotlight at the 2024 Music Tectonics Conference, October 22nd through 24th in Santa Monica, California. It's the place to be for music innovators, whether or not you reach the finals. We have a demo day on the Santa Monica Pier, panels and networking with everyone you need to meet, from investors to labels, and a very special startup boot camp at the Universal Music Group offices. Apply at musictectonics.com, because sharks are mean, unicorns aren't real, but narwhals are awesome.
All right. So, Rob, I'd love to talk a little bit about this new interest that I'm seeing in some of what you've been writing about and thinking about, and in general in the business, direct models. So I hear a lot of creators, not just in music, talking about how important going direct to fan, basically like opening your own Shopify or some version of that is. And so this isn't like a totally new thing. People have been talking about direct to fan for for as long as I can remember. But how do you see this changing the way artists and labels do business? I mean, for artists, it's kind of like, oh, cool, I can sell this. I mean, again, you talk about live, like this is sort of translating live into the recorded or digital realm. How would this change the way artists and labels do business? And what do you see happening? How do you see this sort of dynamic evolving?
Yeah, I mean, it layers on a lot of the same points, in terms of cultivating fandom. And music's really interesting. I mean, compared to, any other consumer product or what could be like D2C, it's just the least sophisticated D2C businesses. I mean, and it's not artists and managers' fault. It's the way the business is set up. But you don't know your customer. Any other business would be obsessed with knowing their customer, owning the relationship, personalizing for them, knowing the metrics that matter, and like over delivering there. And, because there hasn't been an emphasis on it, because whether it's labels or platforms, ticketing, streaming, social kind of own a lot of that data, it's been hard to build really strong D2C businesses. It's always been important. I think it's more important than ever now because of this hyper fragmentation. And it really makes you a strong, sustainable business. The most important thing is it's not, I look at it as not just e-com. When I think of direct to fan, it's like having that relationship, having the data, being able to create your own experiences. And ultimately that helps monetization, but it helps kind of you be self-reliant and independent from needing anything else. A lot of the new models we're seeing, are slight variations on membership models we've already seen before. I think at the end of it, and I think what's also interesting is we're seeing vinyl continue to grow every single year, but it's seems wild to me that we wouldn't have a new format to kind of take that place that's more digital in some way, shape, or form. So I have a feeling there's like a new format around the corner to complement streaming. That I don't know if I don't think vinyl's going anywhere anytime soon, but like, what's the stat? Half of people listen to their vinyl, they own it. To me, it's like people want something that's a direct connection to the artist they care about, that has the artwork, that feels like they own it, it's collectible. There's going to be a version of that. And obviously it wasn't NFTs, maybe a new version of that. But I think there's something that's going to fill that need. And that probably comes direct from the artist. I work with a company called Bonfire that just launched, or literally today, just announced something called Season Passes, which tries to take the membership concept and instead of making it this endless subscription that is very hard to work out for artists, right?
Super brutal for the artist.
Yeah, it's a huge commitment. It doesn't work with like any of your other business lines. It's like a whole new product line. So if you have like a label, it doesn't work with that. It's really vague value for the end consumer, and then it's just hard to keep up. It's like you're endlessly creating. So their whole concept is like, how do you create the memberships around your albums, your releases, your tours, and make them kind of passports to everything happening? And I'm hoping that's one of the things that fits into it. I think we're going to see a lot of different models. I think the biggest thing is artists and their teams prioritizing this, realizing they need to get all of the data, which starts with just the email, the SMS, who the person is, around their business, and not be okay with it being held by other people. Like, that is theirs and they need to get it, and then find ways to act on it.
And the interesting thing, too, that a lot of creators face is sort of this platform whiplash. So suddenly the terms of service change, suddenly the fulfillment costs change. So I've heard a lot of rumors and whispers and dissatisfaction, actually, from, I love Bandcamp. A lot of artists love Bandcamp. Bandcamp is wonderful. They have increased fulfillment costs pretty significantly. And so for a lot of smaller labels, especially, this really hurts. And it's really, and just the postal service is raising. There's always these layers of complications when it comes to running a business.
Or just think about the fact that, so much of the growth that we're seeing from streaming is now coming internationally, which is amazing. But now you have a more spread out fan base, and often in places where they don't have as much disposable income. It's like, how can you monetize on that fandom? It's more difficult.
And how can you speak to them? Like I have a singer-songwriter acquaintance who his song went viral in China, and he didn't know about it until 2 years later. And he had racked up like tens of millions of plays and streams and potential revenue and all that. And like, how do you speak to that audience? How do you make sure that you're, you can engage with them across what can be sometimes substantial cultural differences and things like that? So it's definitely it is becoming a direct-to-fan is exciting, but it also has these really specific challenges that are kind of stunning in certain ways.
It's a whole nother level of what you have to do in kind of running your business as an artist. Even for artists who have big teams, when I talk to labels and I talk to managers, the number one question is, when it comes to direct to fan, it comes to community, it's like, this is awesome. Who should be doing this? Whose job is it? And they're just hoping, when I'm talking to the label, they're hoping
it's your job, Rob.
It's my job. Exactly. Well, that's the thing. It's like, at the end of the day, it's the artist's business, which means it should be either their manager or maybe a new vertical that they hire, because this is so important and it can't be forgotten. But that's a new switch that needs to be turned on, which is hard for people to understand. It's different than maybe how business has been ran. So that's hard. It can also be difficult for the platforms that start around this to really work, because they don't take advantage of like network effects. So like, there's a lot of great fan club type, startups that are happening that I really like and like the way they're building. But, you have to get one by one, get another artist on board, and you don't, it's a much more difficult business to build. So there's a lot of challenges there for sure. And I think it's up to each individual artist business to really create their own model.
Are there tools, though, that you could imagine, whether they're more on the sort of e-commerce side or project management side, or working together with some platform like, like there are ways you can post to a bunch of social media platforms at once and you can manage your socials. Will there be some sort of platform to manage all my direct or e-commerce efforts? What do you think is missing from, you say we have one of the least sophisticated direct consumer businesses. What does the music industry need, and what should we be building to make sure this new direct dynamic can come to its full potential?
Yeah, I mean, part of this is what I'm trying to build with OpenStage and the OpenStage team, which is like the central direct to fan headquarters, which is essentially like CRM, customer data platform, where everything is consolidated and made easy. So it integrates with all the different things you're using. You can use OpenStage tools. You can use other tools that you can kind of power better experiences in all these different places and know like what's happening with your fans across social, streaming, ticketing, messaging. It's in your merch store. It's a big challenge to not only get all that, but then to make it easy for fans, to make it easy for artists. And a lot of that is, there's AI or machine learning and automations that can hopefully make those things easier and easier for people. There's also great platforms out there like Single, which is like turn Shopify into a more music friendly platform for people, and all kinds of other tools that are coming out that I do think simplify it or create, kind of like make, off the shelf business models for artists to use.
And especially if there's no one way to break through the noise, having a collection of templates, or something's more sophisticated than templates, but basically templates that you could use to say like, well, let me try this approach. And because right now it's like you have to build it yourself. And I think it's really daunting to have the patience to give all this stuff time, because direct takes longer to build, right? So way, way longer than something on socials or than on a streaming platform. But it's also more meaningful. So it's a big decision to make, to invest the time. Exactly.
And that's why I think, monetizing like a fan club or something like that is a big decision to make early on. And the most important thing is just to make sure from day one, you are like cultivating relationships and that you're prioritizing whatever I do. Even if it converts less or the numbers are smaller, I want to make sure that I'm bringing people into a space that is mine and owned. And that's like everywhere from your website to just your email list or like building a community. And like you mentioned, like those numbers may be smaller, but they're so much more meaningful and they're really something you can build on and compound.
Cool. This is great food for thought. We're going to take another little break and we'll be right back. If you're enjoying this podcast, you really need to come hang out with us. How can that happen? Well, it's very simple. Seismic Activity, which is our Music Tectonics free online event series. About once a month, we convene the music tech community for networking, discussions, and demos by innovators and inventors. So come join us and tune into the tremors that are about to be major shakeups in the industry. See our upcoming topics on the schedule and register for our next event at musictectonics.com. Now, these aren't your usual sleepy webinars. Would you expect that from us? No, of course. Seismic Activity is fun, fast-paced, and interactive. Anyone who works where music and tech meet is welcome. See you soon. Now, just because we're going out there and cultivating fans and selling direct doesn't mean there's no role for platforms or labels or other kind of exciting, bigger things that stretch across various artists, right? So what are some features or qualities you think established services will need to nurture to keep relevant in the next decade?
That's a great question. I actually wrote a long article about what I would do if I was Spotify's CEO about
I think I remember that one. I'm sorry. I kept thinking of like a Dr. Seuss style illustration. It's like if I ran Spotify, like if I ran the zoo. Anyway,
Yes,
sorry.
exactly. If I was king of Spotify.
What would you
And
declare?
so much to focus on this because I think, and maybe some of the TikTok music threat is less looming now because of everything that's happened since then. But
Oh, yes.
yeah, to me, it goes back to the whole thing of you can't just try to extract, you have to deliver more value. And we're seeing a lot of segmentation from, say, Spotify, but what's the extra value that is actually going to be there? And is that even possible at a platform where everybody's behavior is so, habitually lean back? Uh, and I think, what they should do, or what platforms like that should do, are find ways to really let the artist and fan more organically and directly connect with each other and have a value exchange that's meaningful. Some of these places that means, like something I said was, I thought, Spotify's strategy for creator tools had been to create tools for the musicians releasing music on the platform. And that failed. They've kind of sold those off. The real strategy should have been to have creative tools for the listeners on the platform, right? So, like, how can you facilitate ways for fans and listeners to interact with other fans and listeners, and for artists to create some more of these like lean in opportunities? But these things don't work if they feel extractive or like inauthentic. I keep leaning on the Spotify example, but like I got a email yesterday that was like, "Hey, you're one of the top fans, and I won't say the artist. You should get this thing." And I'm like, I've never even listened to that artist, right? And it doesn't feel like it's coming from them, and it feels like these marketing campaigns. And I think it's you have to start from first principles of like, what does an actual like artist fan relationship look like? Can we let that happen? Can there really be community here? And if the existing platforms aren't going to do that effectively, then we're going to see a lot of niche or new players bubble up that like raise their hand to kind of like fill that purpose, like we're seeing with SoundCloud and Audio Mac and some of these new platforms.
Yeah, the interesting thing is, I mean, I remember back in the day when Spotify was just breaking into the U.S. market, there were a lot of social functions, right? There was like an inbox, and you could like kind of follow people, and people used to like follow your playlist randomly, even people you didn't know. And there was Apple Connect, and there was these attempts to build, but I think you're getting at something important, Rob, which is the future might be defined more by this sort of like blended creative fan world, right? So instead of translating music experiences into texts you share with people via Spotify or other platform, you'd be translating your experience. You would keep in music, like you keep speaking music, for lack of a better way of putting it. You know what I'm saying? So I think that's a really interesting point, because I often think about all of these social audio and social features on different music apps. I mean, SoundCloud might be the most successsuccessful. And part of that is because you can stay within the music, right? Like you can timestamp a thing on a track and go like, say whatever, yeet or I don't know, hooray, I love this, or like great drop or whatever. Sorry. But there's not a lot of opportunity, in Spotify, for example, or other DSPs like it, to just be like, oh my God, the bridge, I love this, or I want to take this bridge and just make a whole loop of that and slow it down and with reverb, and that might be part of the future. What do you think?
I think you're right. I mean, and I think it goes back to that question of can that be layered on top of these existing platforms where we already have a passive experience? Or is it somewhere where you go first for like a deeper social community experience, and then the music is in the other activities are layered on there? SoundCloud in many ways like started very social, and I look at like things like Discord, and it's like there's ways to bring bots in there to bring music in, but it doesn't really like exist on top of the music. And I think there's like an opportunity there for like a new or existing platform to kind of say like, how can we merge these things much more seamlessly?
Yeah, part I think the social features I think we're now getting to a point, thanks to AI and different, more open-minded licensing approaches and other things, where we could see people actually building from a musical standpoint, right? As opposed to just like, oh, social media should look like this. People should send each other messages and they should post things and that kind of stuff. So if we can break the mold and understand what audio can do on its own, I don't know. It's a really, really interesting and very fertile place to think about. Now, I want to kind of close things out and just see if there's anything that you're thinking about that we haven't talked about. I mean, we haven't talked about a ton of stuff that I know you're thinking about, but as you're looking forward in the next 10 years, are there some interesting dynamics, trends, like little hints of some interesting changes in the music business that you really feel are exciting and we haven't had a chance to mention? Like basically open season for Rob. What are you thinking about for the next 10 years?
I mean, because we've touched on so much of it.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
I mean, I think a lot of it goes back to, I think seeing a lot of like direct artist businesses, but in some kind of confederation, right? And that kind of gives artists and fans a lot more ownership.
Yeah, like an artist fediverse.
Yes, exactly.
Yay!
Right? And I'm really interested to see what's going to happen with the major labels, in that they've really moved away from development in so many ways. They've cut out so many of their teams. I always make fun of the labels are just banks. I always thought that's a terrible analogy, but it's like they've kind of become just banks more and more now, and like these investment arms. And we're seeing Universal with these like really strong moves to like leverage their power to say like Spotify or TikTok are going to have marketing tools that are just for us, and we're going to make sure we have certain market share. I look at that, we're going to change the way royalties are paid. And you could look at that in a couple of different ways. One, you could say, wow, they're really going to strengthen their position. It's going to be very, very hard for indies to break through. Or you could look at that as like the death throes of certain power structures that are happening, because these are like grasps at power. And, do we have a kind of like post major label, post-traditional power players involved in like the new level of artists that are coming out? And what does that like post-traditional structure layout really look like? Like music getting further and further democratized. So I'm really interested there. And one of my like scary things is looking at is AI, and that this is maybe not an exciting thing. This is maybe a negative thing. This is AI gives more power to big players and like important IP than it does in a lot of ways any other IP, right? So like if you think streaming helped the biggest artists and IP scale into more and more places and be more available than they ever could have before. And before that, recorded music helped artists scale from like they didn't have to be present or whatever it is, right? Well, now AI takes that further in that, Drake can now collaborate with anybody in the world at scale. He can now make commercials in every single language and every single geo-specific, context scale, and go ad infinitum there. So does that suck up opportunities for all of the kind of the middle and like, developing artists in the world? And what is kind of like the fallout from that is like a super interesting thing to me of like what happens next in music. Do we have kind of like this super class of IP, and then everyone in the world is a music creator, but not as a professional? Is that like a potential outcome of music in 10, 15 years from now?
Yeah, that's an interesting. I mean, in some ways, it's like Back to the Future, right? That was sort of the original state, right? There were often, I mean, at least in say Western Europe, right? There were these like people who had limited access to music, like written music and music that could be published. And then there was everybody else who was always making music all the time. People used to always be singing, creating music, modifying songs that they knew to suit their own purposes, all that fun stuff. And it's kind of cool we're getting back to that, but it's also like, You're right. What is this giant top layer that's going to be very heavy, like a big block of ice sitting on the sea of creators, right? It's an interesting question. And will there, and here's the other question too, if in that scenario, will we have this sort of ongoing nostalgia loop, right? That's like almost like an ocean current that keeps just spinning around and around, where and no one new can really break into that, or not very easily, or very, very rarely, because this is IP everyone knows is valuable, and thus it gets boosted through this kind of AI superpower law, right? Like I don't know, but I have a dream, Rob, that music will prevail, and that the guy and the gal with their like instruments just doing their thing will always gather people around them in some way, shape, or form. We just don't know how.
Yes, authenticity always breaks through, and it goes back to the whole: if you can build a community around what you're doing, then it'll succeed, and people will love it, and it's that bifurcation of.
Yeah.
We either love it or it's in the slop of everything.
This has been really, really awesome, Rob. Thanks for going on this sort of roller coaster ride with me through the future of the music business. And yeah, it's been great.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks for listening to Music Tectonics. If you like what you hear, please subscribe on your favorite podcast app. We have new episodes for you every week. Did you know we do free monthly online events that you, our lovely podcast listeners, can join? Find out more at musictectonics.com. And while you're there, look for the latest about our annual conference and sign up for our newsletter to get updates. Everything we do explores the seismic shifts that shake up music and technology, the way the Earth's tectonic plates cause quakes and make mountains. Connect with Music Tectonics on Twitter, Instagram, and LinkedIn. That's my favorite platform. Connect with me, Dimitri Vitsa, if you can spell it. We'll be back again next week, if not sooner.
You're listening to Music Tectonics.